would mandate at least two. Him in a chokehold, which led to his.
Okay. You're listening to Uptown Radio. It's Thursday, May 4th. Today on the show, City Hall is taking action to stop businesses from misusing facial recognition technology. And New Yorkers are divided.
Yes, facial recognition can and will keep people safe.
Oh no, I'm not into that.
One of NYC's most successful matchmakers tell us why hundreds of single New Yorkers are ditching their swipe right addiction and heading straight to her door instead.
And what sells is the idea that you're not good enough as you are.
Did you know there are over 1,000 different species of insects in NYC? Today, the city will add a few more as the American Museum of Natural History opens its new book hall.
Ooh, what's this guy?
Lover grasshoppers.
All this and more on Uptown Radio. But first, the news.
War-era charges rarely used. It is the most serious offense to come out of the January 6th attack. Senate Judiciary Democrats say they may have run out of options to address growing ethics concerns facing the Supreme Court. NPR's Claudia Grisales reports this comes after a ProPublica news story documenting that a Republican billionaire donor also helped pay private school tuition for a relative to Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas.
Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Dick Durbin says it's up to the Supreme Court's Chief Justice to address the growing conflicts.
The key to this is Chief Justice Roberts. He alone has the authority and the power to change the ethical standards of the court.
Durbin said the panel cannot force a subpoena for GOP mega donor Harlan Crow to appear, in part because the panel is missing a key Democratic vote with California Senator Dianne Feinstein still out due to illness. Durbin also does not expect to ask Justice Thomas to appear, saying there is no historical precedent for the panel to force a sitting Supreme Court justice to testify. Claudia Grisales, NPR News, the Capitol.
The Kremlin's accusing Ukraine of launching drones in an attempt to assassinate President Vladimir Putin, but U.S. intelligence chiefs say it's unlikely Russia will retaliate with nuclear weapons despite escalating tensions. Here's NPR's Jenna McLaughlin.
During a Senate Armed Services hearing, intelligence officials expressed skepticism that Russia would use nuclear weapons during the war in Ukraine. Director of National Intelligence Avril Haines said the intelligence community has concluded that scenario is very unlikely. However, officials are watching escalating rhetoric from Moscow, including accusations that Ukraine launched drones to attack the Kremlin. Ukraine has denied those accusations, but Haines says the intelligence community doesn't yet have evidence to independently verify what happened. Even so, it's unlikely President Putin was at real risk, as the drones were small and Putin does not reside within the Kremlin building, Haines confirmed. Jenna McLaughlin, NPR News.
A New York his 2014 hit Thinking Out Loud did not unlawfully copy Marvin Gaye's classic 1970s hit. A jury found the heirs of Ed Townsend, a songwriter of Let's Get It On, failed to prove copyright infringement. Sharon addressed reporters outside the courthouse today.
These chords are common building blocks which were used to create music long before Let's Get It On was written and will be used to make music long after we are all gone.
Sharon said during his trial that the copyright claim was a threat to all musicians who write their own songs. This is NPR News.
And it's on WNYC in New York, I'm sure.
From Columbia Radio News, I'm Isabel Tier. New York City's Committee on Mental Health, Disabilities, and Addiction met today. 12 new bills were introduced, including one that would mandate at least 2 crisis respite centers in every borough. At the hearing, council members spoke about Jordan Neely, a 30-year-old homeless man who was killed on the subway this week while allegedly experiencing a mental health crisis. A fellow passenger put him in a chokehold, which led to his death.
Jordan Neely was murdered on the floor of a subway car rather than helped. He was killed.
Attorney General
Jordan
Letitia James is investigating the National Football League alongside California's Attorney General over allegations of employment discrimination and a hostile work environment. More than 30 former employees of the NFL, all women, said they experienced gender discrimination and retaliation when they filed complaints with the NFL's Human Resources Division. And some more news from the Attorney General today. Almost 200,000 New Yorkers will soon begin receiving checks from a settlement with Intuit. That's TurboTax's parent company. The company tricked millions of low-income Americans into paying for free tax services. Attorney General James announced that the eligible consumers will be mailed their checks throughout the month of May. Ed Sheeran is not a copycat. After 3 hours of deliberations in a lower Manhattan courtroom, the jury in the copyright infringement case ruled in Sheeran's favor. The case revolved around 2 hit songs from 2 different eras. Sheeran was accused of copying Marvin Gaye's iconic song, Let's Get It On, when writing his 2014 hit, Thinking Out Loud.
Welcome back. This is Uptown Radio. I am V Tran. A new bill introduced at the City Council yesterday could see facial recognition technology banned in New York businesses. Thomas Copeland went to Penn Station to find out more.
I'm standing just outside Madison Square Garden, an iconic New York landmark, and a business already very well known for its use of facial recognition technology.
Calls tonight from Madison Square Garden.
Madison Square Garden is getting heat for its
Madison
use of
Square
the
Garden was in the hot seat at City Council
today.
to halt its use of facial recognition technology.
The new bill introduced this week would ban businesses in the city from using facial scans to identify their customers. Madison Square Garden has gotten a lot of hot water for blacklisting some corporate enemies from concerts and games. And outside the venue this morning, New Yorkers are, well, indecisive.
I think if used properly, yes, facial recognition can and will keep people safe.
Oh, no, I'm not into that.
You don't like it?
No.
Why not?
Just keep that information in a database. We don't know where it goes.
To be honest with you, I don't do anything bad, so I have no problems with it. I really don't. I don't know.
Round by a service entrance, one of the Madison Square Garden's workers spotted my audio recorder and came to find out what I was up to.
Well, I tell you, it makes this place a hell of a lot safer.
Do you work in here?
I do, yeah. I think city councils should mind their own business. This place brings in so much money to the city.
What's your name?
Paul.
Paul what?
Oh, no surnames.
Oh, go on.
No, not today.
Paul's okay with a face scan, as long as no one knows his name, apparently. Albert Fox Kahn runs the Surveillance Technology Oversight Project. He's throwing his support behind the bill. Albert, how many businesses in New York are using facial recognition technology?
The terrifying reality is that we have no idea. Even though businesses are required by law to post warnings whenever they use facial recognition or other biometric surveillance, we see that a lot of companies aren't doing that. So sitting here today, I really have no idea how many times in a given day my face is being scanned.
It's been widely reported that big businesses like Macy's and Bloomingdale's use facial recognition technology to keep their customers safe by identifying shoplifters, for example, when they walk in their premises. But Foxconn says there's no clear data that this approach actually works.
I mean, this is what we hear every time our privacy is being invaded and our data is being taken. And I would say, where's the evidence? Where's the evidence that this is effective? I mean, facial recognition technology is invasive. It's ripe for abuse. But we know that as dangerous as facial recognition is for all New Yorkers, it's particularly alarming for Black, Latinx, Asian, and immigrant New Yorkers.
And that's a key part of the motivation behind this bill. When introducing it, lead sponsor council member Shahana Harif said it was, quote, all too familiar with this city's over-reliance on surveillance technology to harass communities of colour. And there are multiple studies to show that facial recognition technology is far more likely to misidentify people of colour. This has led to 5 wrongful arrests around the country, all of them involving black men. Sarah Aoun works with Crypto Harlem, an educational group teaching Harlemites about cybersecurity. She says people have a misconception about technology being neutral.
The people who are making the decisions behind this technology are embedding their own biases and their own lens and their own view of the world into this technology. So, and in this case, it's like white faces, white men, white faces. The machine learning algorithm is not then able to recognize something that is different than what is being trained on.
So, Sarah, is the answer then not to improve facial recognition technology rather than to ban it?
So the argument of let's make this technology better in order to avoid certain people being arrested wrongfully is a shaky argument because this technology anyways is being used to target folks and individuals that have been historically marginalized and historically targeted.
This bill is being introduced alongside another, which would ban facial recognition technology in residential buildings. Both are now in the hands of the council's technology committee. If they make it through there, they'll be put to a vote on the whole city council and then placed on the mayor's desk for final approval. Thomas Copeland, Columbia Radio News.
The country Israel is at a tipping point. The right-wing government is pushing laws to change the balance of power and weaken the court. This is causing difficult conversations in New York City synagogues, and that means it's up to the rabbis to help their congregants as they grapple with these complicated issues. Henrietta McFarland checks with New York City rabbis to see how they're coping.
It's 7 on a Tuesday evening, and the rows of blue folding chairs at the Keene Street Synagogue are packed. But the congregants aren't here for a typical service. It's Israel's 75th anniversary, and rabbis from around Brooklyn have joined together to find a way to mark the birthday. Anakai Lau-Lavi is sitting in front of the room. He's one of the rabbis leading the meeting.
What is the role description of your role as rabbi? What does it entail?
I'm the spiritual leader of a congregation, which means that I'm there when people have needs, such as a baby naming or a burial, or when they have a broken heart or broken limbs.
But tonight his role is different. The rabbis at this ceremony want to help their congregants consider their connections to Israel. That's difficult this year because of the protests against the Israeli government. Prime Minister Netanyahu's government has proposed controversial changes which would limit the Supreme Court's power to rule against him and other elected officials. Protesters say Israel's democracy is at stake. Rabbi Lau-Lavi says members of his congregation don't all agree on the issue. As a rabbi, it's his job to lead his community through difficult and confusing times. So he and other rabbis are making a point to discuss this issue, even though it's a thorny one. One of the rabbis standing at the front of the room asks the attendees what they think about the country's foundational promise.
75th anniversary. How do we celebrate?
She says, on the 75th anniversary, how do we celebrate? Everyone starts talking at once. It's hard to hear over all the voices. You can feel the tension rising in the room. After centuries of persecution, including the Holocaust, which saw the systematic murder of 6 million Jews, Israel was meant to be a place of hope and refuge. One lady sitting toward the back of the room says she's really disappointed in the Netanyahu government. Then a man at the front of the room stands up and raises a different issue.
The original sin of the expulsion of the Nakba.
He says the original sin that accompanies the expulsion of Palestinians is here, undogged and unresolved. He's talking about the Palestinians who were displaced and exiled from their homes as Israel declared its independence. Today, many of their descendants remain stateless. The UN says there are nearly 6 million Palestinian refugees. There are Palestinians who do have Israeli citizenship, but they are a minority in the country. Rabbi Laolavi says it must be addressed. He's also a human rights activist and has spent many years advocating for the rights of Palestinians. He's playing that role tonight.
It's an opportunity to ask hard questions.
Could you tell me what would some of those hard questions be?
Well, the hard questions are there are many people in my community, in my world, in my family, and in my friend circle who are not Zionists, who do not believe that Israel should exist as a land, as a nation, as a homeland for Jews, if it comes at the expense of a democracy that is an equal opportunity land and state for all its people.
Some rabbis in New York don't bring up the topic of Palestinians at all. I reached out to about 10 of these rabbis, but they either declined to comment or did not respond to my emails.
So how do you celebrate the transition from we honor the fallen who have died in the wars and in all the violent attacks, and then we celebrate Israel's independence and we're pro-Palestine? And we know that 20% of Israeli citizens are not Jewish and they are Palestinian. And they're not celebrating tonight. Some of them are my dear friends. So how do we do both and?
But as a rabbi and activist, encouraging his congregation to join in the protests in New York City is another way he's been addressing the topic of Israel. For the past few months, protesters have been gathered next to the fountain in Washington Square Park. Today they're holding blue and white Israeli flags, and they're shouting the Hebrew word for democracy. Carrie Carter is a rabbi at the Park Slope Synagogue in Brooklyn. She's also been at many of the protests, but says addressing the topic of Israel and her congregation has been challenging for her. She initially didn't want to speak to a reporter about it.
Israel is just complicated. Israel is just complicated.
Rabbi Carter has a different approach than Rabbi Laolavi to addressing the conversation of Israel with her congregation. She takes a more backseat approach and focuses on giving people space to think for themselves.
I've always thought of my role as being a person who creates a frame so that people can find their path, especially now around Israel. I feel like my role is to help people come to these spaces and figure out for themselves how they can be a part of the conversation.
Carter says Israel's 75th anniversary can't be addressed in one event or in one space. So the Park Slope Jewish Center is running a series of events on Israel. From reflectives like the event this evening to Israeli film showings, a poetry reading by Palestinian Israeli poets, and kids' activities. But rabbis are people too, and just like her congregants, Carter says she also needs help sometimes.
So you help all these people, you give them advice and frameworks. Where do you go for help or advice?
There are wonderful colleagues who can help, and on top of that, I have an amazing therapist.
But a therapist can't give advice on what to tell a congregation about Israel. That's Bastia Gartenstein's job. She gives advice to the advisors. I caught up with her at another protest outside the Israeli consulate in Midtown. A swarm of umbrellas and Israeli flags wave in the air. I hop under Gartenstein's umbrella to chat. She works for a Jewish community organization in Virginia, but she's been sent all over New York State to speak at synagogues.
And people feel intimidated, and so they don't maybe feel confident enough to look for information, and synagogues feel nervous about what side to take in the issue.
Gartenstein's job is to equip them with the complicated political knowledge they need to confidently talk about Israel with their congregations. Back at the Kane Street Synagogue, for Rabbi Laolavi, that extends beyond synagogue doors. It's personal. Israel's birthday is his birthday too.
I'm 54. For the last 54 years, there's a double-decker, 2-tier chocolate cake with whipped cream, frosting, and strawberries with candles and flags of Israel.
One of the cake's layers is for him, the other for Israel. Laolavi grew up in Israel and his family still live there. He shows me a video message he received earlier that day from his family in Jerusalem. His family is sitting around a large wooden table singing Happy Birthday in Hebrew. And of course, in the middle of the table is the two-tiered cake. Lael Levy says he's usually not too happy about having the Israeli flag on his cake, but this year, for the first time, he's okay with it.
I told my mother, you can do the little flags. This year I won't mind. But I see so many people who have the flag and are excited about what it means as a hopeful sign of the Israel we want, not the Israel that is now.
The flag has become a symbol of the protest movement in Israel. Members of the Kane Street Synagogue will be heading out to the Washington Square Park to protest again on Sunday. And the rabbis here this evening hope they can play a part in helping their communities through this challenging time. Henrietta McFarlane, Columbia Radio News.
And now for one of our regular segments, is a slice of the city.
One day and they fired me 36 hours later, which causes one to pause.
Ron Canada, Emmy Award-winning journalist turned actor.
As an actor, I'm in the business of feelings and subjectivity and conveyance of emotion. The same curiosity, the same questions. Why? Why? But instead of trying to stand outside of it and be quote-unquote objective, I dive into it. And I've managed to put a lot more smiles on people's faces than I ever did doing the news every day.
You're listening to Uptown Radio, Thursdays at 4.
May the 4th be with you. It's Star Wars Day, celebrated worldwide on May 4th, because it sounds like May the 4th be with you. Get it? Star Wars is primarily a work of entertainment, but it also had a significant impact on pop culture and society. Professor Basil Spiegel teaches international and public affairs at Columbia University, and I asked him, what do the movies have to do with American politics?
At its core, Star Wars is a story of transformation. It's a story of becoming. And that is a very common theme and common narrative in politics. The person who perhaps was not clear on who they are, on what their contributions can be. Perhaps they thought their life was going in one direction and all of a sudden there's some intervention and they end up becoming greater than they've ever expected.
I also think it's not only in politics, right? It's more also on society. And is that the American dream, you think?
Well, it's certainly a prevalent American narrative. Whether you're, the story of the immigrant who comes to this country with nothing, and then all of a sudden invents something and becomes part of American culture.
And George Lucas mentioned that he made the movie, the original trilogy, as an allegory of both the American Revolution and the Vietnam War.
I think the story that he's trying to tell and the parallels to the Vietnam War, it would be that a group of people who in some ways are largely written off can start a revolution, can actually grow exponentially.
If we can imagine some Star Wars character would run for office, what platform would they run on? Who would you choose first, and which platform that person would run on?
Well, you could see a number of people in the Star Wars saga running for office. Darth Vader could run for office, right? What would Darth's platform be? It would be bringing unity and order to the galaxy, right, or to the country, right, under a very strong authoritarian rule. He'd obviously be very strong in law and order, right? It's not about social. It's not about the social safety net at all. It's all about bringing law and order to the country. So he would be the kind of political figure that would sort of run for office, run for president. Interestingly enough, even though Vader wouldn't, you could see Anakin wanting to run for office as well, sort of a pre-Vader, maybe rules slightly differently, but with those tendencies to be more controlling. That would be actually an interesting storyline. What if Anakin had not become Vader? What kind of leader would he be? So,
do you want to say any political message citing from Star Wars to our listeners today?
Always, there's always a Yoda reference, meaning, which is do or do not. There is no try, right? So if you want something, you could go after it and you do it. Don't try, just do it or don't do it. But you don't say you can't, because if you say you can't, you've already failed. And so don't limit yourself.
Thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, thank you. It was very, I had two of my favorite things, Star Wars and politics.
Professor Basil Smikle of Columbia University. One of New York City's most popular museums got a little bigger today. It was the grand opening of the Gilder Center at the American Museum of Natural History. But some people are calling it the Bug Hall. That's because there are live bugs in the exhibit. And as Elizabeth Earth reports, this is a big departure for the museum.
New York is filled with creepy, crawly bugs. So why do we need more of them in the city? I met scientist Jim Carpenter in the Natural History Museum's new insectarium. I asked him, why should we care about these pesky things?
You could take away, for any particular terrestrial ecosystem, take away all the mammals, take away all the vertebrates, and the ecosystem would continue along. You take away the insects and it'll absolutely collapse overnight, basically.
The new center looks almost like a cave. There are canyon-like arches that lead to skylights on the ceiling. It took nearly a decade and hundreds of millions of dollars to build it. There are millions of live bugs in the exhibit, and Carpenter takes me over to see a couple of them. Ooh, what's this guy?
Lover grasshoppers.
They're like red and some yellow on it. Is that cabbage?
Yes. Yes. They have quite a diet.
Having live creatures is a big deal for the Natural History Museum. It's mostly known for its dead things, stuffed bears and dinosaur bones. But they found that when they put up a temporary live butterfly exhibit years ago, it was a huge hit. Even today, the elementary school kids can't get enough of the ants.
Yo, what are they doing right there? How did they get up there?
The museum hasn't totally gotten rid of their dead insect collection. Behind the scenes, special rooms are kept for researchers. Butterfly expert Aga Pirwola pulled open a drawer.
Look at these.
So how old would these butterflies be?
So the collection span about 150 years. Some of these, let's look at the label here. This is from Brazil, 1945.
Back in the insectarium, Jim Carpenter says New Yorkers may even learn a thing or two about the bugs in their everyday life. Oh, that's funny. A typical New York apartment has up to 20 insect species? Is that true?
Yeah, it's true, unfortunately. Of course, the ones that are noticed by most people are the cockroaches and so on, and not too happy to see them.
Ironically, there are no live cockroaches in the exhibit. But can you find them hiding somewhere else in the museum? Probably. Elizabeth Erb, Columbia Radio News.
In a city of 8 million people, you think finding someone to date would be easy. There are dating apps, dating events, you can even hire a professional wingman. But many people say those strategies aren't working for them. Izapa Macias met with one of New York's most successful matchmakers.
If you're single, or even if you're not, chances are you've been on a dating app. So why do we need an old-fashioned, in-person matchmaker like Amy Van Doren? She runs the Modern Love Club, and for the past 16 years, hundreds of people have given up on the apps and gone to her instead.
Dating has become harder because the way people are dating online is they see someone, they're trying to figure out ways to disqualify each other.
This is more than just a sales pitch. I went out in Manhattan last weekend and found that no one is satisfied with the current state of finding love. describe dating in New York?
Scary.
A lot of bad options. Like a lot there, just not if it's good.
Swiping on looks, swiping on what people have in their profile.
Crowded, confusing.
There's some like very unusual people out there.
You meet someone and a couple weeks later, you just don't see them again.
It's hit or miss, and most of the time it's miss.
So the gist is, it's not great. Wouldn't it be nice if there was someone to do all that hard labor for you? This is where Amy the matchmaker comes in. She only takes on 16 people every 6 months, but she has a file of thousands of people she can set them up with. Amy began doing this 16 years ago, mostly for fun.
Started off as a piece where I would sit in the park and do like free love advice.
How did you do that? Did you have a sign? Did you just start talking to people?
Yeah, I had a little sign. It said free love advice.
When she first started the project, Amy says she was young and that what she really wanted was to get to the bottom of loneliness. Eventually, she started charging for her service and making appointments.
I thought I would do it for a short amount of time, like maybe 2 months, and then 2 months was a year, and then people kept wanting to hire me, and it kept growing, and then it eventually turned into like over 15,000 hours of matchmaking interviews for an hour each.
How long did it take to have 15,000 hours of interviewing?
I mean, just this whole time, 16 years.
So here's the way it works. Anyone, young, old, gay, straight, can sign up to be in the Modern Love Club's Rolodex. It doesn't cost anything. And one day, maybe years later, Amy might call you with a date suggestion. Her main clients pay upwards of $10,000 to be personally coached and set up on dates over the span of 6 months.
The first thing I do is I hear their story and see if I can connect.
Every new client goes through an initial hour-long, in-depth interview with questions like, what are your goals? What do you value? What kind of music do you like? What are your political views? What's your family like? What weird stuff are you into? Are you religious?
My favorite question is, would you eat pizza in bed?
She says that with a matchmaker, there's no ghosting. They always strive to understand why the date went well, or what went wrong, and why.
Everyone's fully accountable. It's a very conscious way of dating.
Amy says for one of her last batches of 16 clients, 4 of them got engaged, which is pretty remarkable in the modern world of dating. One of those success stories is Victoria Alexander. She's in real estate and owns her own business. She went to Amy the matchmaker when she was 35 years old.
I think I led with my type A personality on dates a lot, and Amy really worked through some of the ways that I should change my dating behavior, and she rewrote all my bios.
The service also includes all the preparations for dates. Victoria had access to a professional makeup artist and photographer, and help with shopping and dressing for dates. Victoria had spent a year dating and going on horrible first dates, one after another.
And that's when I was like, I need help. I'm not just not meeting the right people. I'm not attracting the right people. I'm not agreeing to go on the right dates, picking the wrong people to say yes to. But I remember that it changed the way I was dating and changed the way I approached dating, and things got better after that.
Victoria met her now husband shortly after working with Amy. 8 years later, they're still together. But what is it that sets Amy the matchmaker apart from all the other services in the city?
I think that, a lot of people are like, I'm a business person first and a matchmaker second. And for me, I'm like, I am on this planet for one reason and one reason alone, and it's to help people be less lonely.
So I feel like what you're really selling is just the opportunity to fall in love with yourself, first of all.
You have to, because if you're not being your most engaged self, if you're not inspired, if you're not going on a journey of loving life, that's what makes people attracted to people. It doesn't matter what size you are or how rich you are. As life becomes and as the world becomes more unknown, the one thing that really matters is love.
And maybe because of that, our dating optimism has yet to die. When I talked to all those people complaining about dating apps, most of them said they weren't ready to give them up. Do you plan on continuing trying dating apps?
Yeah, it's fun when I'm bored and after a couple glasses of wine.
Isepa Macias, Columbia Radio News.
Next in our commentary series, Thomas Copeland tells us about his process of finding comfort in uncertainty.
If you can't tell from the way my voice sounds, you'll find out pretty quickly that I'm from Belfast in Northern Ireland, because I'll bring it up, and then I'll bring it up again. The reason for that is because it's my specialist subject. You see, Belfast is a really small place. My house was maybe 5 minutes from my high school and 10 minutes from my college. And I lived in that house since my first day of grade school and never lived anywhere else. Longest I'd ever really spent away from home was a few weeks in China at the age of 13 for a school trip. My first morning there, I went straight for the Western food section of the breakfast buffet. Eggs, sausage, bacon. My mum told me off as she dived into a plate full of food that neither of us could really identify. She spent that evening throwing up in the hotel room, so for the rest of the trip, we stuck to the fry-up. At age 13, the lesson was clear. Don't mess with what you know. And that's the way my life went from there. That's not to say I didn't challenge myself or work hard, but it was always built on a foundation of the familiar. I lived in the same house, hung out with the same people, ate the same food. I could have moved out when I started college, but bam, the pandemic. And I just couldn't justify paying rent on an apartment right around the corner when all my classes were online anyway. I didn't apply to graduate school with much direction. I just put in some applications, including to a few in America, never believing it would actually happen. It was just far too expensive. And then the stars aligned. The scholarships I needed to come to Columbia fell into place, and I've never been one to turn down offers of money. So I never really thought about how it would feel to forego the familiar. And what happened next wasn't that pretty. I hated New York. It's like 30 times bigger than Belfast for a start. I knew absolutely nothing and absolutely no one. The shops were weird and sold stuff I didn't recognise. The subway system made no sense, and everyone except me seemed to be in the know. Didn't have a single story or a single source. Going from knowing everything to knowing nothing felt almost as if I was drowning in ignorance. And I felt that way for months, all the way through the first semester. But then, a funny thing happened. I was finally back home for Christmas, and I still knew everything. And it was all so familiar, and weirdly, I didn't like that much anymore. I certainly hadn't fallen for New York, but without realising it, I'd fallen for something else, the process of knowing nothing and then trying to learn everything, or at least something. I did my master's project on public housing, an impenetrably complicated web of political and economic policy. When I started, I was as ignorant as it was possible to be. But after months of work, I could tell you the difference between Section 9 and Section 8 of the Housing Act. I could correct inaccuracies on cable news. And the first time a real-life journalist called me up to ask for my analysis of eviction rates, it felt like such an achievement. The feeling of knowing nothing and then learning something was totally addictive. And that feeling, I wanted to chase it. I decided I didn't want to go back to Belfast just yet. From then, my job applications had just one criteria: that I would know absolutely nothing and start from scratch. And that's what I did. So when I'm done from school, this home bird from Belfast is moving to Alaska, of all places, to a remote island town of 3,000 people, access only by seaplane or boat. That's just about all I know. And it's a gift to myself. For the man who loves to know everything, time to know nothing.
That's it for this edition of Uptown Radio. We hope you enjoyed the show. Our executive producer today was Izapa Macias. Leading our staff of reporters was senior producer Henrietta McFarlane. Director Trisha Storrs coordinated our studio production team. Our producer, Valentina Zarin Martinez, led our copy team and assisted in the studio. Isabel Tier delivered our local newscast. Day reporters Thomas Copeland and Elizabeth Erb brought you the latest on the ground in New York. Our instructors, Sally Herships, Robert Smith, and Lida McMullen-Laird advised our staff. Uptown Radio is live Thursday at 4. Until next time, you can always find us at uptownradio.org. From all of us here at Uptown Radio, thanks for listening. Thanks. And happy May 4th.
May the Force be with you.
Thanks, Yoda. Well, you're the Obi-Man for me. I am V-Tran.